Greetings, traveler. In the previous video, we tackled the question of how to plan for all possible player capabilities and design challenges that they find interesting. In this video, we look at the same topic from a different angle when considering player builds and designing the game in such a way that no matter what the player's build happens to be, we have a challenge specifically tailored for that particular player. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now, and the question of builds is one that comes up in many games, since many games allow the player to configure their abilities and customize them in a way that suits them in particular. So this is an extension to a question asked by a traveler called Ep103. So let's jump right in. First of all, where do we encounter this kind of situation? Well, first, when we're thinking about player builds as designers, we have a difficulty imagining all the possible combinations of abilities and items and so on that the player might bring to a challenge. We think that we set all these things out in the game, typically in skill trees or unlockable throughout the game, and the player is free to make use of them as they like with any given combination and so on. So how is it possible for us to design the game in such a way that we can anticipate what sort of builds the players will build, and no matter what they choose to do in the end, have good enough challenges for them to use these builds on? The hard mode of dealing with this is, again, putting a bunch of abilities in the game and saying, well, these are all cool, so no matter what the player chooses to use, they should be able to have fun with them. Again, that's similar to what I mentioned in the previous video. That's one direction you could go, but it leaves too many things to chance, and it's too vulnerable to players acting in the game in a way that you didn't expect. And the worst case of this is they use the build that they want, but it's not effective in the game, so they're not having fun. So unfortunately, they decide to stop playing the game, which we would like to avoid. So how can we move from this situation of randomness and letting things go as they might to something more purposeful, more designed to give a good experience to the player? So when looking at all the abilities that we have put in the game, it is good to start thinking at that point about what sort of play styles we would like to have available in the game. And of course, players are free to come up with their own combinations and do whatever feels interesting to them. But at the design stage, we should be able to imagine what's possible for the player to do, and what would be the most fun ways, according to us, to use all these abilities inside the game. So yes, the player can come up with any combination, but it's good for us to design specific builds before even any player has the opportunity to play the game, to play them ourselves and try to think about what would be possible with this build, what this build is supposed to achieve, and what would be the fun points for the player using this build. So I'm going to dive into a specific example to show you exactly how we can plan for builds. But the core concept here is that hopefully everything that is in the game is purposeful. So yes, the player might do whatever they want, but the whole point of playing a game is us designing an experience for somebody else to experience it. So since we have the power of designing it, we control exactly what is possible and what would be fun, according to our opinion, for the player to experience. So thinking about that, it should be very easy to plan, if not all the possible builds in the game, but at least some of the more common ones, and make sure that at least the most common builds and the ones we intend to include in the game on purpose provide a good experience. Now, whether players will happen to use the builds exactly as we wanted, or whether they'll create something on their own, is either way is fine, of course, but the more we can imagine the possible builds and the more we can design good experience for the players using them, the better we can guarantee that the player will have fun using these builds. So let's jump into an example to see exactly what we mean. So for this example, we're dealing with a sample game that has modern combat. So soldiers, guns, military tactics, that sort of thing. No magic, no I don't know, medieval melee weapons and so on. We're keeping it all modern and all very high tech and specialized. So in this type of game, we decide in this sample game, we decide to keep the player choices bound around specific weapons. So we can have a type of build that focuses on using a machine gun, a different kind of build that focuses on using sniper rifles. Another player might have grenade launchers, or they might decide to focus on the pistol. So of course all of these are available in the game and players are free to use them as they like. But as designers, we can jump in and already put in the game some goodies for the player to discover when they start using this particular weapon. So in our sample game here, what we're going to do is say, pistols are cool, there's all these other super powerful weapons, but perhaps there's something in our game that the pistols can do that is a bit special, a bit interesting, something that only this class or type of weapon has the capability of doing. Now, of course, in every game, this can take any shape you want, and it can be as close to real life or as far from real life as you want. But the unspoken promise here is that these are some cool things to do with the pistol, these are some cool things to explore, and if the player does choose to do so, they should be able to get the rewards that we put in the game for them. So specifically, let's say that in this pistol, for people who use a pistol in the game, they can go the precision shooter route. That means that when they level up their character, or when they customize their weapon, or whenever the opportunity comes in the game, or when they find new weapons, whenever those power growth opportunities come in the game, we set a route for them to specialize in precision shooting. And when we're thinking about precision shooting, we think that, okay, by targeting a specific point on the enemy, the player who's using just a humble pistol can achieve such a great effect that is comparable to the other larger weapons. So how can the player achieve that? Well, we can have a time slowdown mechanic to emphasize the fact that the player is super good with these pistols and they only need one well-placed bullet to defeat an enemy or cause massive damage and so on. So because we have these mechanics in the game, it follows logic that we also need to provide these weak points on enemies that work together with this precision shooting system. So on the player side, we need to provide the slowdown mechanic and the crosshair targeting to show that, look, when you're specializing in precision shots with a pistol, you can really target very specific points on the enemy. And then when we're designing the enemies, we need to make sure that they feature these weak points that can be taken advantage of by the precision shooter. So this could be headshots, heart shots, liver shots, whatever biology shots, things that will cause a very large amount of damage for the humble single bullet that was used from a normal pistol to achieve it. And by providing these on the enemy, we can make sure that the player who chose to devote his time or his resources or his skill points or weapon modifications or whatever down this route, they feel rewarded for using this build. So in other words, we anticipate that this is one of the possible builds in the game, and we create rewards and ways to use this build in the game by the player. So if we didn't do this and we said, you know, this build can give you so much precision and you can shoot exactly where you want the enemy, and the player did that, and he didn't do any more damage than the other builds, or a headshot did the same damage as a shot anywhere else on the body, then it doesn't matter how much we say that this is a precision build. If it doesn't take form inside the game and players don't see the higher numbers, or they don't see the reward for investing in this build, then this build would feel pointless and people wouldn't want to use it. So let's consider a different build. Let's say that another route you can go is with a longer magazine. So you don't focus on like really aiming every single bullet, but instead you create longer clip magazines in your pistol. Maybe you have a semi-automatic pistol or something, so you can make up for the damage that you're missing out on from the precision build with more bullets. And yes, perhaps you're using more ammo than the precision build, but you can deal perhaps more damage to reflect the fact that you're spending more resources than the single shot build. And you can also say that the additional benefit is that you have lower downtime between shots because you have such a long clip. So you can kill an enemy and continue shooting the next enemy without having to retarget the enemy and recalibrate your shot and so on. You can just spray bullets because that's what this build is good for. And of course, when the clip empties, then you have to spend some time reloading, just like all the other builds. But because the clip is so long, then you can go quite a while before you have to reload in the heat of battle. So this is a specific playstyle that you can plan for, and you can not only design the enemies to to be affected by this build in a particular way, but you can also perhaps adjust the frequency of the enemies to show that, look, even when you're pressed with 3 enemies at once, this build has no problem with it because it has the clip size to respond to it, while other builds might be more pressed to deal with 3 enemies at once. So the frequency is one of the things you can modify. Of course, there's infinite things you can modify to make this build shine. Another thing is having enemies with high hit points. So perhaps the amount of damage dealt by this build is so high that it kills enemies very quickly, and it feels like an overkill, right? So if an enemy dies with 1 bullet in other builds and you're shooting 3 bullets at once, it might feel like an overkill, and it might feel like, you know, there wasn't really any point in specializing in this. You're just wasting bullets. You might as well go with another build. So to avoid that situation, we make sure that some enemies in the game have particularly high hit points, and it doesn't matter which part of them you choose to shoot or what kind of weapon you have, but they just have a lot of hit points. They're very tough, or they're very armored and so on. So no matter what, they just need a high amount of damage to take down. And this is something the long magazine build excels at, because it just outputs so much damage and it shoots so many bullets at once that even those super tough enemies it can take out easily. So this is something that needs to exist in the game to make this build feel impactful. If every enemy dies with 1 bullet, then shooting 3 bullets at a single target would feel like a waste. So we need to modify the enemies to make sure that people using this build have a good time. And finally, let's talk about special bullets kind of build. So this build doesn't shoot with as much precision as the first one, and it doesn't have such a long magazine as the second one, but the player using this is crafting special bullets to take advantage of different situations. And let's say that some of the bullets can do poison damage, and some of them can shoot glue at the enemy, and some of them hit with hit such a big area and with such force that they can even disarm opponents if you aim at the general direction of the opponent's weapon or sword or whatever they happen to be carrying, or knife. So this already makes the assumption that enemies can be poisoned, and that this poison is going to be impactful to combat. So if the poison, for example, takes so much time to act that by the time the enemy dies from poison, they will have been shot at by some other soldier on your team, then the poison is there, but it's not impactful. So in the case of poison, we need to make sure that it's acting fast enough to see the results and make it meaningful in combat. And again, there's many ways we can apply this in the game. One way is to say that whoever is affected by the poison instantly becomes more slow and more sluggish, or their performance drops instantly, so you feel less threat from that enemy. Another way to use the poison is to say that in a situation where there is cover-based combat, even if you hit the enemy at their shoulder or just graze them anywhere on their body, that's enough for the poison to act, and I don't know, 5 or 10 seconds later, that enemy just collapses and he's not a threat anymore. So we need to provide that system. We need to provide the numerical values on the enemies to allow for that quick response from the poison. And if we decide that this poison type of attack is best used in cover-based combat, or combat where you might just graze the enemy, or in a very dynamic environment where enemies are just running around all the time and you don't have time to do precision shots, then we need to create that environment to go with this build as well. So the cover-based environment or the fast-moving environment and so on. If we think about bullets that shoot globs of glue, for example, then we need to make sure that the weapon can support it, that the player will find enough glue bullets, or they can craft glue bullets. And when these get shot at the enemy, then the enemies react in a special way to show that they have been glued to the floor or to a wall or whatever. So it could be the case that if you shoot glue at their legs, then their speed drops down, or if you shoot the glue at their feet, then they get stuck to the floor and they take a while to move again, or they're just stuck there until somebody comes and rescues them. If you shoot the glue at their weapon, then the weapon becomes ineffective. These are very good ways to show immediately in combat that if you choose to invest in this build, in these kind of bullets, these are the effects you can expect. And if you can shoot an enemy with glue on the head, then maybe they become completely disoriented and their accuracy drops by a lot, and they spend time trying to remove the glue from their helmet or something. So these are realistic responses to this glue substance that impact combat immediately, and you need to make sure that you design into the enemy so when they get shot by these bullets, they react in this special way, and the people using these glue bullets feel good for mastering them and crafting them and actually using them in combat. Finally, you might have disarming bullets in this build, so they could work in a multitude of ways. You could say that they just expand in midair and they just hit the enemy's weapon with force, so they hit it with such force that it just knocks it out of their hands. You could say that again, maybe they're acidic, or they have some substance that knocks the enemy's weapon unusable, it makes it unusable. Or if it's a very, very high-tech environment and you say there's computers even in guns in this world, then you can shoot a short-range EMP that very specifically disables the computer chips in the enemy's weapon, and the enemy cannot use that weapon anymore. So again, just by going through this conceptual list, we at the same time make a list of capabilities or debuffs that we need to design into our enemies to react specifically to this kind of bullet that disables the enemy's weapon. And of course, when this happens, the enemy might drop their weapon, they might spend time trying to repair their weapon, or it might the weapon might get knocked from their hands and one of your teammates can pick it up. All these things need to be very quickly shown in combat to make the player feel that it was a good choice to invest in these disarming bullets, and it feels good to create this effect, especially when it seems that none of the other weapon classes can create this. So this is just to give you a sample of how to think about builds, how to plan ahead for builds, how to make sure that when you have a few builds in mind for your game going forward, you can make sure that people using them are having a good time. And of course, it goes without saying that if somebody wanted to do a dip in multiple builds here, that should still be possible, right? So if someone wants to dip into precision and special bullets and specialize in, let's say, poison shots with high precision, then that would follow that even in a very dynamic environment where you don't have time to go for the perfect headshot or whatever, you can still, this particular build can still have enough precision to at least affect enemies with poison, even at a long distance, even if they only show a little bit of their body, to still be effective in this situation. If you don't want this build to exist, all you need to do is make it ineffective, and players will naturally steer away from it. So that's another tool in your arsenal. So I hope this gives you some perspective on builds. I know it's something very hotly discussed by players, but players can only use what we put in the game. So instead of trying to control power and try to limit the power of all the builds that the players think about, I think it's a more fun possibility to try to anticipate as many of these builds as possible, and when we anticipate them, try to design the game to support them in the best way possible. Will we be able to perfectly predict all the possible builds out there? I don't think so, but hopefully we can predict enough of them that we can make sure that the vast majority of our players can have fun, at least with the builds that we did manage to predict and we did set all the necessary elements for in the game. And if through game analytics and game data we find that players are using this new amazing build that we did not anticipate, then instead of trying to ban it or to remove it from the game and so on, which is one solution to the issue, I think it's more fun to lean into it even more and say, oh my god, it's so great that players discovered this new thing that we didn't anticipate. Let's create some content in game and let's create some enemies to be specifically vulnerable to this kind of build. So whether this player uses this build alone or in a team, they can have fun too, because that's a good way of sharing the fun with as many players as possible. Anyway, I hope this helps at least one other person out there. I hope this answers Dempa3's question on builds. As always, thank you so much for watching, and have fun.